Hi guys, welcome back to We Should Talk, a pop culture interview series from In the Know. I'm your host, Gibson Johns, and this week on the podcast we have Eboni K. Williams from The Real Housewives of New York City. Eboni's first season of New York was this past season that just wrapped without a reunion, and we recorded this interview before it was announced that the reunion was ultimately canceled. So just for time-wise perspective, that's when we recorded this. But I was really happy to get my time with Eboni at the end of the season. You know, a lot of the time I'll interview a new housewife at the beginning of her season, and there's really not that much they can say other than what they've done before the show and what we can expect, quote unquote, going into the season, but there's not that much they can reveal. So I think it's actually really nice to interview a new housewife at the end of their first season so they can have the holistic view of the filming process, of what it was like watching it back, the social media aspect of it all. So, Eboni just had so many amazing answers to questions that I had for her, and they kind of blew me away. And, again, I said we can agree to disagree on this season, but I do think that in doing this interview, my perspective changed on certain things. And if anything, if that's the one thing you can ask from an interview, it's to change your mind on something or to make you think differently about something. And that's certainly true for me from this interview. So if you're a fan of RHONY, if you're a fan of Bravo and are interested to see what Eboni had to say about her first experience on Real Housewives, keep listening for my interview with Eboni K. Williams. And please rate, review, and subscribe to We Should Talk on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. All right, so we're here with Eboni K. Williams, newest star of The Real Housewives of New York City. Eboni, I'm so happy to have you on. How are you?
It's good to be with you, Gibson. It's been a while since we saw each other, so I'm happy we finally get to chat.
I know, in some ways I kind of wish we had done an interview earlier, but I also think that right now is a good time to do the interview because we have the whole season to look back on, and we have the holistic experience,
I concur.
Yeah. So how have you been doing since the season stopped airing? So it's been several weeks. How are you holding up, and how do you feel any sort of weight off your shoulders now that it's kind of aired already?
I feel amazing. I do feel a sense of relief in the sense that, like you said, now the whole story is there for the taking and for context and for people to really kind of absorb all of it holistically. And, I actually put up an Instagram post, Gibson, maybe 3 episodes into the season, really pleading with the viewership of RHONY to bear with this season. It is unlike any season in the 13 years of RHONY history for many reasons, including my addition and the pandemic and the race reckoning of 2020 that our past dealt with, and the election of a generation. So we had some really unique circumstances.
Just some little things,
and spoiler alert, I really was meeting all of these women for the first time. Unlike seasons before and other franchise where new cast members are organically part of friend groups. That was not the case, and nobody made a secret about that. So the building from the ground up of brand new relationships is a process. It's a process. And so our season really documented every aspect, the good, the bad, and the ugly of that process. And then at the very end, I think as in real life, you get to an incredible place with new friends where, there's honesty and there's humor and there's mutual respect and a little bit of trust that it takes time to earn in terms of intention for one another and the ability to really enjoy each other authentically.
Yeah, for sure. I think we saw that. I think that finale to me was one of my favorite episodes just because it did feel like you guys had gotten to some sort of the same page, in some capacity. You know what I mean? I think that really came across, and it was fun, and I liked that.
I did too, and I loved it. And I just would say that people should just consider that that's what it took, for us. That's what it took. I understand for maybe a different woman or a different group of friends, it could have been that episode 3. That wasn't the case for us. For us, it took every aspect, every conversation, every moment to get to what ended up being, I think, a really fun, beautiful, again, authentic reality.
For sure. And you mentioned sort of several episodes in, you kind of pleaded with the audience to bear with you. Do you feel as though a large segment of the audience did just that? Do you feel like enough people like really bared with you and gave you that grace?
I do.
Good.
I feel like I got the not text message. I'm so old. Gibson, Lord have mercy. The DMs and I'm like, what are those little
there we go.
again? The comments and the DMs to support that, from people that, said I wasn't really clear about, how you would fit into this group, or if you would, or what my opinions of you and this season would be. And by the end, they just saw some things that were pretty fantastic, and that they were really pleased that they did stay the course and watch the entire season play out. There was a huge payoff, and by way of my personal story, I, obviously found my father. I, went through an incredible, personal journey with breaking up my engagement, and then finally at the end, realizing I'm going to buy my own home here in Manhattan, and, just moving forward and onward and upward. And, I appreciated the grace and the space to be able to do that.
Absolutely. Well, I'm glad you felt that, because I think in some moments, the obvious surface level feeling was that you weren't getting that, and I'm glad that ultimately it felt like that you felt that, and I think from what I saw, if you dug a little deeper, like there were a lot of people that were in your corner, and so I think that's really special that you did feel that.
I think so too. And I think it's also like, the loud minority. I think it's really easy to read, tabloidy headlines, and I get it. It's housewives. That's always going to be a part of it. And, if it bleeds, it leads. So if it's salacious, if it's negative, if it's nasty, if it's spiteful, that's going to dominate conversation. But, again, I just got back from London, an amazing birthday trip. There were so many people, like, I couldn't, get on the tube. I couldn't grab my handbag without somebody who was a RHONY fan, across the pond, just
that's
being
so fun
into the season. It was great,
I love that.
And I love it.
Yeah, that's so fun.
That awful accent, but it was fun.
I couldn't do much better than that, so that was good. You mentioned it's no secret the last like month and a half, 2 months, there's been a lot of headlines, a lot has been made of, I don't know, there's so many accusations, so many allegations, theories of where they're coming from, et cetera. And I know that you're not big on speculation, but I would love to know from you, just when do you how do you sort of decide what to respond to and what not to respond to? What goes through your mind in terms of like, okay, should I just ignore this, or is this going to get louder? Like, I'm just curious what that mindset is for you.
Yeah, that's a really specific process for me, because what I'm doing is applying my lens as, I don't talk about this often, Gibson, but, there were a few years where I actually owned and managed a crisis communications firm myself. Had, at EK Williams Communications. Yes, I have a degree in communications along with Black Studies. I'm obviously a trained litigator. And I was doing media trainings and comms management for clients. Got it. So I'm an expert of sorts in that space. So it is a real analysis for me to say, is this headline gossip and pure, what I kind of call messiness, in a way that doesn't really move the needle, doesn't impact my professional credibility, doesn't really impact public discourse in a way that I find dangerous or toxic. And if that's the case, obviously I let that go. So there's a lot of stuff that, you just let slide. The stuff that I tend to respond to, and this is really from my training as a political operative, it's very dangerous when you allow actual false narrative, like truly false on its face, that has a consequence to continue. For instance, when there was an accusation and some brag that I was threatening to sue the network or the production company for the non-renewal of a contract, I had to stop that in its tracks, because number one, just a first-year law student could actually tell you there's no legal cause of action for the voluntary non-renewal of an optional agreement. Exactly. Period. Full stop. Yep. So that's number one. And the implication is really dangerous and toxic, because, the implication is there are hundreds of thousands of legitimate lawsuits and legal courses filed in the name of racial discrimination. And the subtext there was that I would be somehow erroneously trying to apply that to an inaccurate application of it.
Right.
And that's so wrong. It's wrong for me, it's wrong for the network, and it's wrong again for the very legitimate claims that go on in this country and in the world every day. So I had to just, nip that one in the bud immediately.
Yeah. So I mean, that's so interesting. I didn't realize that about you, that you had managed a firm like that. So you're in some ways you're really primed to think these things through in that way. And I think that's, again, you're well equipped, and that's awesome. I think that's
I'm uniquely equipped, and I'm very grateful to that, Gibson. It's a lot of people were curious as to why I chose to respond, for instance, to the Vulture piece, and Brian and his take, which he does every week, and that's his job. And I read it, and whether I like or dislike it, I appreciate the work. But I felt the need to respond there too, because, just journalist to journalist, I wanted to just kind of challenge him to just be a bit more thoughtful in the analysis. It's okay if you want to, do a searing critique of an episode, but just, have some accountability as to the why there. And I think that it was really well received even by Brian, because, I think all of us in the space, can appreciate some professional, just checks and balances, to just keep this thing moving.
Yeah. And I really, I mean, we don't need to get into it, but I really appreciated that back and forth, because I appreciated, I appreciate all of Brian's work that he does, but I also appreciated the open letter that you wrote. And then also his response, I thought was very, he kind of waited a beat to respond to that, I think. And I think that was probably really smart of him. And then I like that your response to that response in your interview with Variety. So I think that, that gets at an idea, though, that like, I think that people kind of take it for granted, but it's like some of the things that have happened this season and some of the conversations that have been had never would have been had before. And these lessons never would have been learned before. And I think that in and of itself has so much value for a lot of people, both in front of the screen, watching the screen, behind the screen. Like, I think there's something to be had there for everyone. So I think people just have to remember that,
Yeah, I mean, it kind of goes into, and I agree with you. I think Brian's thoughtfulness was really appreciated. I heard from a lot of other housewives, Gibson, from different cities, that, just appreciated somebody kind of having the audacity really to just actually say something,
Right.
And I think like a really good example is Andy Cohen recently, put on Instagram an exchange he had with, a troll basically, who was being really saying he should be a better father. And Andy's like, oh, in what way? Like, again, that, kind of push for accountability. And the person goes, oh, I'm just a troll. Like, I didn't think you'd respond. And I get that all the time too. We all do, right? Oh, like, just kidding. I love you.
Didn't think you would see this. Exactly.
Right. It's like, this is called the internet. And, we're human beings. We're real people. And that doesn't mean that as public figures, we don't expect scrutiny. We don't expect, some level of, that comes with every job, but we're humans, and we're putting a lot out here, most of us, that take this job seriously, putting our entire lives out for public consumption. And, just a little bit of grace and thoughtfulness around that is just so, I can't tell you how much that's appreciated.
For sure. And it's so interesting, because I think that a phrase that gets thrown around a lot comes with the territory, and I think there are some elements of being a reality star, being on Real Housewives, what have you, that there are things that do come with the territory, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they should be accepted at face value or not evolve with the times, if you will. More than anybody.
Yeah, you gotta just take it as good as you can give it, is what I say.
Totally. Generally, it's been, quote unquote controversial season of RHONY, and probably one of the most so in recent memory, for a variety of reasons. Obviously, we've talked about this. And I think, from some of the discourse that I have seen, there's a contingent of people that place it on like you and Leah as the newer people on the show, when really it's like, you also had to contend with COVID. You also had a 5-person cast. You also had a friend of drop out kind of halfway through the season, and then a new friend up comes in. So there's sort of all these elements, right? There's sort of all these elements.
That did happen.
There's all these elements that sort of contribute to this different feeling season, I would say. And And I think in that there's sort of this mentality of like going back to the good old days of these shows almost. And I think we've seen how that mindset, that phrasing has manifested itself in other areas of the world, and
Yeah.
and how it's not really healthy to be stuck in those old days. Did you get that sense, as again somebody so in it, that there was this contingent of fans that just like wanted it to be back like it was in season, I don't know, 3,
Oh, 100%. And listen, as somebody who grew up on RHONY, grew up on actually Orange County, Atlanta, and like I understand the seeking of that nostalgia. Like, not to get like overly psychoanalytical, but there is something to the comfort of things that feel historically familiar to us.
Absolutely.
When we are in a current state of crisis. And let's be very clear, we are in a global and national state of crisis still. So it actually makes a ton of sense to me, and nothing that I at all take personally, that people want to go back to Jill, Zarin, and Ramona, and Mario, and whatever that hot coach was, Jill had, on the tennis court. I get that. What I would implore people to consider, to your point, is those particular days are not coming back. Those particular days.
Exactly.
And that's true of RHONY, that's true of American politics, that's true of, any other cultural idiom, right? We can't go recapture what has passed. What we can do though, is lean into the present nature and interesting realities that are upon us today. And I am going on record to make a proclamation that for all that's been said about this season 13, and it will live in infamy, I am sure, I actually think a lot of the aspects of our season will age incredibly well. I think when we are having this conversation in 5, 6, or 7 years, there will be introspection and acknowledgement of some incredible things that happen on our season that people just probably can't fully appreciate and make space for in real time right now.
I think that you're right, and I think that it's gonna what the season for me in my mind is gonna do. It's leading us to also better days too.
It's a transition.
Exactly. And so we're gonna appreciate it for that.
Yes, this is a bridge season, and a bridge of any sort is not necessarily the most romantic, glamorized, appreciated thing, but it has a very important purpose, right? You can't get from point A to point B without a bridge of some sort. So if the show, and I think like you said, this is true of other cities and other franchise, that once the show's on for 10, 12, 13, 15, 16 years, there has got to be a bridge point, a point of inflection.
Absolutely.
That takes you from the nostalgic era, which is of glory, to be clear, and gets you to what the renaissance of it can look like.
Yeah, it's possible to hold those in your heart, and then also recognize the need to move forward. Yeah, for sure. And then something I'm wondering is like, obviously I think a lot of focus has been paid to the overwhelmingly hurtful criticism and feedback, and that isn't really based in fairness, in whatever you want to call that. But I'm curious, as you've kind of been looking at social media as the show has been airing and paying attention to what fans are saying and getting DMs, was there any piece of criticism or feedback for you or your time on the show that you heard or you saw and you were like, like maybe that is something that I can change, or maybe that is something that I could be doing differently or think about differently?
Well, let me think here. Only because I had such intention going into filming in terms of just holding myself accountable. Again, I'm a pretty self-aware person. That doesn't make me a perfect person. That doesn't make me a person without mistake or flaw. It just says that I'm pretty thoughtful. It's funny. The one thing, and I've said this before on Watch What Happens Live, that I personally felt a bit bad about, that I would have handled differently, no one seemed to care about from a viewer standpoint. I guess there was so much else going on, and that was just the whole Heather and Leah of it all in terms of the vote. Like I just, in retrospect, I had my own very clear position around people voting in this election, and I should have and could have communicated that to my friend Leah without injecting the Heather of it all.
For sure.
But again, nobody really gave a shit about that because everybody was talking about everything but that. So.
Well, that was sort of why I asked that, because I feel like just so many things got overshadowed this season by other conversations, and I was curious if there were anything sort of like more minor like that. But I think, you know, that's fair.
I mean, also, I mean, this again, it wasn't criticized, but in retrospect, like I would not have thrown that election party, period. It's not something I do because like on election night, I'm normally working. I'm a journalist, like, you know, so normally I'm in studios, I'm working. So these were exceptional circumstances. And obviously I'm filming the show and, you know, there was conversation about, oh, maybe there's an election party. So fine, I did it. But, you know, in retrospect, that was not really authentic to my sensibilities. You know, I'm also not a particularly partisan person. So those things just didn't really feel that didn't feel important to me. Like an election party, like, please. So
that makes sense.
I would have not done that, and if I were to do it again.
And we were never going to get an answer that night, so it's sort of like
that's what I knew too. I was like, we're literally not going to know anything by like midnight. So this is really a waste of good food and drink. But
I think, you know, there's also a lot of focus on you and Ramona, you and Luann. But I think something that I really loved about this season was something that I saw first of all, your friendship with Sonya and sort of how that sort of blossomed on throughout the season. But also just what I saw in Sonya, because I think her, Luann, and Ramona have moved in the same kind of social circles for the past probably 20 years or so. And I think that she showed that she had much better grasp on certain conversations and around race and social justice this season. And I think that she was, and this is to give Sonya all the credit in the world. She was, you know, it was a pleasant surprise seeing how quick she was to kind of say some really kind of poignant things and really kind of push back on some more problematic things that were being said. Is that something that you felt in season in filming? Because I think it was really apparent watching it, but I'm curious, as when you're in it, did you feel that from Sonya, that she had that grasp?
Very immediately. And I want to be clear here, her grasp wasn't to be overstated, meaning it's not as if Sonya is going to sit here and write a dissertation on, you know, the Black American experience.
It's all relative.
But here's the good news about that, Gibson. That's actually not the requirement. That's not the mandate. The mandate in a socially, culturally conscious America is simply to do what Sonya does so wonderfully, which is listen and consider. Listen and consider. That's actually all you have to do. I am not a part of the LGBTQ community, for example. So there's so much I am ignorant to, do not understand, do not know. And I have friends who are not only a part of the community, they work in the spaces of liberating and creating safe havens for these communities, particularly, for instance, like Black trans women who are just being murdered at just catastrophic rates. But what I understand is that my role in this part of our shared humanity is to quiet, listen and learn, and adjust my behavior accordingly. And that's what we see Sonya do throughout the season. And I also really appreciated that Sonya, without me even ever explaining it, was able to pick up, and we figured this out during our trip to Philly, which was so much fun.
Yeah.
And she was trying to tell the ladies this, you know, like, Eboni's really fun and sweet and amazing, but she's very serious in getting clear that you understand her disposition, her pride, and her of being recognized. And we can all move on from that particular point and enjoy each other more. And unfortunately, it just, you know, really didn't resonate with all the women. Yeah. But I felt so seen when she said that, Gibson, because that's the thing. Like, actually, nice. I'm not even getting a bonus check for like educating these women or the cast around these issues on a deep level. It's really just, I want to be friends. I want us to have amazing times and friendships together, but I'm just not a fake. So we've got to start from a place of, you see me, I see you, now we get to move on.
Well said. I totally, I think what you just said is perfect. And I think it sort of gets into, I mean, again, you've done some really fantastic interviews throughout the whole season, but I mentioned the piece of Kate Arthur from Variety, and
Oh,
to me, like
yeah,
I think about that interview kind of a lot, because I think it's kind of her questions were just so well thought out, and your answers were so thoughtful, and I think it laid a lot out there. And I think it was a really anybody who watches the show, I tweeted it out and I said, anybody who watches the show should read this piece, because even just as, again, I watch like almost every episode of any franchise out there, and I still learned so much just from that interview. And I think one of the things that that I really picked up on was when they talked about the criticism that you bring too many politics to the show and what have you. And I want to get this right, but you said, you know, you weren't really talking about politics that often. You were really kind of talking about basic values of humanity. And that's what you said in the interview. And that's a very important distinction. And I think that it's clear that there's a contingent of people out there that don't want to accept that distinction. But again, as a white man, as a white viewer of these shows, that was something that I learned a lot from that. I learned a lot from viewing these shows, and it's the importance of word choice to me is a commonality. I look at Beverly Hills, and it's them calling Garcelle a bully and not calling anybody else a bully, even though arguably their behavior was more of a bully. But so there's these moments where I think word choice is it can seem so insignificant, but it actually is one of the most significant aspects to just discourse that we have. I'm curious if, like, again, I'm just telling you this because it's something that I've learned, but are there other people that have reached out to you saying that they have learned lessons like this, that they have really picked up on things of this nature, throughout your season? Because I certainly have.
And I gotta say, I just appreciate you sharing, because this is an exchange. This is not me at the front of a whiteboard, at university, giving out pop quizzes. This is an exchange. I am learning as well. I am curious as to how things land. I am curious as to how people receive them. And yes, I mean, I sent a note to my mom last night. It was a DM from, a viewer that I don't know, who was, a white woman from the Midwest. And she just said, it's interesting because I've always really, been proud of the fact that I think of myself as a non-racist individual who only sees people based off of who they present. And I was proud of the fact that I said, I don't see color. And that's very common, by the way. And by the way, there was a time in our country where that was the standard, where the correct approach to issues of race in America were to remove them entirely and strive for a colorless society. That happened. I'm old enough to remember it. What has happened, as happens in society, is we've evolved. And we've gotten to a place where, because we are further removed from some of the historical trauma of our country, we can now say, I think we might be at a space where we're responsible enough as fellow Americans to sit with one another's individual cultural experiences and make space for them, and not force the elimination of them for the sake of a harmonious society. We've progressed. That's what progress is. In actuality, right? To say that, it's kind of like when I'm old enough to remember, I don't know if you are, Gibson, don't ask, don't tell.
Oh yeah, I remember that.
At the time, that was perceived as a progressive policy. Yep, I remember it. I remember when it was perceived as the way we will get around homophobia in America is we won't talk about it.
Exactly.
We won't address, we will force people into closets that put their lives on the line for our nation as a way of getting around homophobia. And that was perceived as a progressive policy on behalf of the, LGBTQ community. And then 20, 40 years later, that's a horrible policy that strips, limits, and deprives our fellow Americans of an aspect of their basic humanity and identity. So I think that's actually the perfect parallel as for people to see. It really is. Yeah, you know what I mean? That the colorless perspective, while perhaps well-intentioned, is very toxic and very hurtful. Because if you tell me you don't see me as a Black woman, as I've been told as recently as parts of this season by a particular castmate off air, that means you don't see me.
Right.
That actually means you don't see me. And if you don't see me and you're telling me you don't see me, and then when I'm asking you to see me fuller and you show up with hesitation and outright defiance of that, right? Now I don't really know how to engage with you. So those were some of the growth points that we, were able to experience as a cast.
Yeah. And I think, just hammering it home is like, it's just as important for the millions of people watching these shows as it is for the 5 women that are stars,
my God.
if not more.
Yes.
So. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Same with Black Shabbat, and I had incredible conversations with, people from all, walks of life and places in the world about various aspects of that evening and, the geopolitical implication, all of it. And I was accountable and I learned, and it was just really ultimately what was a show of a couple of episodes amounted to an incredible forum. And that's why I did the show, obviously.
Yeah.
I didn't do the show just for drunken antics and ridiculousness, although I did enjoy lots of tequila throughout the season. But because that was one of my favorite things. I forgot I did that when we were leaving for the Halloween prom party, and I grabbed the tequila to get into the party bus. It was like, I have to have it. Anyways, I did it to create conversation, and that happened. People might not think they want it or need it, but by the time we got to the end of the season, I think it was a lot of appreciation for it. I really do. Yeah,
I'm glad to hear that. And then you also said in that Variety interview that there's sort of this inner sorority of housewives of color that are, especially some of you newer guys who are coming onto predominantly white cast. It's Tiffany and Crystal and you mentioned Garcelle in that interview.
Yes.
I think to me, that felt so special to me because I think, at some point there was just one person of color that was coming on to a show with a predominantly white cast. And now for you guys to have people that you can talk about these really specific experiences that you're having, but across, I guess, those 3 shows, it's a relatively similar experience, I feel like. And for you to be able to, can you just speak a little bit to just having that sort of small forum for yourself that's a way to be able to talk about some of these things with people?
It's so invaluable because this first of all, this platform for every housewife, including white housewives, can be very lonely. And I know you've interviewed enough housewives, Gibson, to know that.
Yeah.
As much as there's notoriety and visibility and following, it is actually very, at least for me and the people I've spoken to intimately, it can be a very lonely experience. And so therefore having even a handful of people who can say they really get it because they've lived it too in their respective spaces, it just helps with that so much, and, I'm fortunate in that some of my castmates, are honest enough to say, I love you and I want to support you and I'll do everything I can, but I don't get it. It's not, I don't get it, but it's like, that's not my experience.
Yeah.
I don't live that experience. I'm not the first Black housewife. There wasn't a ton of press around my announcement before I even got on the show in terms of an anticipation of
building it out, right?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I appreciate the acknowledgement of what you are experiencing is very different than what I'm experiencing. And that said, so being able to pick up the phone and talk to Crystal Cumming-Goff, to chat with Garcelle, really deeply, who has been greatly a mentor to me because, like you said, she was the first on an all-white cast. And had a very unique experience. And then, Tiffany's had a different experience being a housewife in the South, because, and I'm from the South and, that's a whole different experience.
Yeah.
I'm actually I'm going to dinner with Tiffany on Thursday night. I'm going to be in Dallas. So
love.
Yeah, which is going to be great. And Crystal and I were talking yesterday on the phone, we've just gotten really close. And I also don't pretend that it's a duplicate experience because, Crystal, specifically, she is a Chinese American woman on that show in that space. And so when she was dealing with a tremendous amount of Asian hate, as she still is, I actually picked up the phone and called a long-term friend of mine who was also of Chinese descent. And I said, Vicky, what shall I say to my friend, who's my new friend, who's experiencing anti-Asian discrimination very publicly. And I know what it is to face anti-Black sentiment, but I don't know what it is actually to face anti-Asian discrimination. And I'm not going to be ignorant enough to equate them entirely. And I just say that to say, Gibson, it's okay to ask for what to say. Mm-hmm. It's okay. I think it's very important. And my friend Vicky, who's incredible, gave me particular language to be able to offer Crystal in that moment. Same thing with all the anti-Semitism that our country has faced this year. I pick up the phone and I ask, my Jewish friends, what do you need to hear from me in this moment that lets you know that I am not complicit in this terrorism and that I am here for you in moments of good and bad? Like, tell me, because I'm not going to sit up here and be arrogant enough to assume that I know without going to seek the information.
Of course. Yeah, that's very important to say. And and I think I just think it's, again, we're having these, we're seeing, representations and lived experiences that we've never seen on these shows before. And I just think I just have such an appreciation for it, and I really like that this tide is turning. But I don't want to get to the end of the interview though without saying that you literally found your father through this experience. I think that it's interesting because there have been other, there have been quote unquote storylines of other women on other franchises where they're like looking for a family member, and it never really comes to fruition. And I think it leads fans to think that like it can be like kind of faux, but like this was not that. And I think that like you literally found your father, Eboni, like that. I can't even, and you put it into such great words on Instagram and on that post you did, I thought was so touching. But I'm just, one thing is, being on the show, did that sort of fast track you trying to do this, to make this, to go on this journey and to look for your father? Was it COVID sort of giving us sort of all of us sort of a little bit of extra time in our lives? Like what sort of affected you doing it on the show?
So it was, I want to address your comment because it was true. And I didn't anticipate it actually, because I'm trying to think, I guess maybe there had been, like, I remember Nene had a story.
Melissa Gorga tried to find a sister at one point, I think, or something like that. Yeah.
And I don't follow New Jersey as much as some of the other franchise. So I wasn't aware. But I remember there was something along those lines. Yeah, but I remember you were being really nasty to me in the comment section about the Melissa comparison. Like, and they literally said, like, this is cringeworthy. That you are, so desperately looking for relevancy around this. And this was early on in the process on the show. Of course, I'm reading it thinking, God, you're going to feel like
little do you know.
Yeah, exactly. But that's all right. And that's why, again, I am somebody you just really have to let the process play out in its entirety. But it was COVID. Because with COVID, obviously, unfortunately, we all saw the devastation of people losing their lives in an instant of all ages. And that made me scared in the sense of, it's kind of like me in motherhood, right? Where I felt like I always knew one day I might want to try to find this man, but I was procrastinating. It's like, not now. I don't want to get depressed if I don't find him. I got work to do. I'm trying to dominate the world. You find an excuse.
You've always found an excuse.
Basically. I've always found a reason to put it off. And then with COVID, I realized if I keep putting this off, this man, if he's not already, might not be available to me to try to build a relationship with. So it could be a now or never scenario. The other thing was this show made me feel like it would be bigger than me. So it made me feel, and this, I'm so grateful to God, has come to fruition. I knew by me going on this journey, on this platform, in front of millions of people, being an accomplished woman, an accomplished Black woman, would help destigmatize a lot of the shame that a lot of people feel that grow up fatherless.
Right.
Or grow up thinking one person's their parent and realizing at some point down the road it's not the case. And, I just can't tell you how much shame that can elicit, and insecurity and imposter syndrome and just all of these things that, you probably overcompensate to mask,
right.
I mean, my therapist even has suggested that part of the reason I pursued a television career as a journalist was this like subconscious hope that my father would see me.
So interesting. Wow.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah. Wow.
And see me and just innately be like, that's my child. And I had never thought of it that way, but I was like, there probably is some truth to that.
Yeah. Wow.
So all of that to say, yes, knowing that I would get this platform to amplify my journey and experience, and that would hopefully incentivize other people of all walks of life, all races, all ages. It's never too late. I've had women in their 70s reach out to me and say they were looking for a sibling, a father, a mother. My amazing genetic investigator, Linda Doyle, said that she connected a man to his 92-year-old brother.
Wow. It's never too late.
Never too late.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
That's
it's
incredible.
It's incredible.
And it seems like it's been really rewarding for you to have finally done this.
Yeah. And again, like I talked about on Tamron Hall yesterday, it hasn't been a fairy tale. I've not really much talked to my father since that one first call. But, the reality is now when I fill out applications, like when I renewed my passport, I actually have a name to put there for the first time in 37 years. I don't think people get that. Like every SAT application, when I took the bar exam, when I got married the first time, it was NA for 37 years. Yeah. And for now to be able to actually put a name there that I recognize and know, it just really changes one's perception of themselves.
I'm sure. Yeah, it's just about having that answer, and that is so uniquely special, right?
Yes.
And I think wrapping it up, in that Instagram post, you wrote that, lastly, while much has been made of my debut season on RHONY, please know that for me, it's all been worth it. And I think that I'm so glad that you said that, and I think that, and I'm presuming, and correct me if I'm wrong, that has to do that's not only because you found your father. I feel like there are probably other elements of this experience that have made it worth it, and maybe will continue to make it worth it if you come back for another season, But can you speak to that? Can you just speak to that a little bit as we wrap up, and just because I think it's important to say.
100%. I mean, yes, finding my father, if that was all I got out of it, that would have been enough. But that wasn't all I got out of it. It was really important for me, just small things, honestly, Gibson, that I really wanted to convey as a younger woman of, what we relatively see on RHONY, who is figuring out love and, what family plan. I mean, we didn't even get to a lot of those things, the fact that, I have frozen eggs. I probably need to do another cycle if I'm going to try to continue to wait. And I don't know that I want to wait. I kind of feel like I'm 40 in a year. I probably should get this show on the road.
Go for it.
And maybe that means single motherhood. And maybe I'm okay with that in a way that I didn't know I would be okay. I was going to go find another rental when I moved out of the place I shared with my fiance. And, as I talked about in the first episode of RHONY this season, I had gone through this financial rehabilitation and rehab my credit from my messiness in LA. And, I looked up and, oh my God, I've got a really nice financial setup here where I have savings and a great FICO score. And what would it be like to buy a house in New York as a single woman, which I never really kind of thought I would be able to do. So yeah, like to even like my hair right now, like there's scenes where, I'm a pageant girl. So I love some honey, I give me full drag. I love all of the clip-ins and all of the glam and all the
blue eyeshadow. I loved that look. That was a good one.
And that was a very controversial look.
Oh, I loved that one.
That was my overt take on an over glamorized 1980s beauty queen. And I thought it landed very well. And for those wondering, the shadow is by Pat McGrath. A lot of people wanted to know.
The more you know.
But even just showing as a Black woman, in this interview, this is my hair. This is what my hair looks like. There's scenes where I wake up at Ramona's and it's just my bare face without makeup. Just kind of showing the different variables and the complexity of women and Black women in particular, because there's so much made of our hair and our skin and, our ability to show up with femininity and beauty based off of, Euro standards.
Yeah.
So it was really important for me to also just do that and give the people some looks and, to wear that Dapper Dan Gucci
Oh yeah,
pink and green
major.
jacket.
Mm-hmm.
That was a big deal for me, Gibson, not just because it's Gucci, but because it's Dapper Dan. Dapper Dan is a legend of fashion, particularly in Harlem.
In Harlem, exactly.
Yeah, that was an ode to, the legacy of Dapper Dan. It was an ode to my sorority, Alpha Kappa Alpha. Like, there were just things I wanted to do this season that I was really proud of my ability to be able to do in full. And those things, really made it worth it to me.
Yeah, good. Awesome. Well, Eboni, I feel like we could talk for probably 5 hours, but
yes,
we've already gone over. But thank you so much for taking the time to talk. I mean, we talked about this at the beginning. I'm long overdue. I'm so glad to finally get some time to really talk with you. And I'm looking forward to people hearing this. I think that this is a really great conversation that we had, and
I love it. And I just want to say, Gibson, I'm glad we had it now versus back in June.
Me too.
Because I think it's so much fuller, and I'm able to be more even transparent with you because now you've seen the context of the season.
Absolutely. Well, Eboni, thank you so much, and we'll see you on The View. I'm excited. I'm crossing my fingers for another season from you. So much more to come from Eboni K. Williams. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you, my dear.
Yeah, chat soon. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much for listening. For more celebrity interviews, subscribe to We Should Talk on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. If you like what you heard, please rate and review us, as any show of support you can give us would be greatly appreciated. You can follow me at Gibsonoma on Twitter and Instagram, and you can follow In The Know at In The Know on Twitter and at Watch In The Know on Instagram. We'll talk to you next time.